After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
I have extensions installed that may affect the quality of the call.
In a good way, right?
I don't know. Like, that's what Google's telling me. And I'm like, well, it's a free show. They get what they get.
That's true.
All right. Sound check is good. You guys ready?
Yeah.
I'm ready. Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's dive right into it. Hey, dear listeners, welcome back to the Greenhouse. It's me, your host, Adi. I am rejoined by Greenhouse Gaslighting DC correspondent, Josh.
Hello, everyone.
And our new, I guess I'm going to call you our tech correspondent now.
Ooh,
hey, John.
nice. How's it going? Hey, glad to be back.
So we're going to dive right into a bit of a current affairs episode. We're planning to get into this news about the Stephen Breyer resignation, maybe get a little bit into this Russia-Ukraine conflict, and a little bit about that disaster that was the r/antiwork interview on Fox News. Let's get right into the Stephen Breyer resignation. I think this was over last weekend, right? That Stephen Breyer announced his retirement from the Supreme Court?
End of the week, last weekend. Yeah. Very soon, though. Very breaking news. This is kind of one of those things where there is... I mean, it's sort of just like a sigh of relief, right? It's like one of those things that we've been waiting for a long time, and the guy just would not step down. I actually, to be honest, I think this, if he was going to retire, and I'm glad that he is, I think this is honestly the best time for him to retire. It's a good way for the administration to sort of pivot on some recent legislative losses, and sort of do something that, will... I don't think the Supreme Court really excites the Democratic base much. It's just usually a source of anger when, of course, we get Republicans messing with the court. But I think it's really kind of just one of those things that, like, better now than later. And I think, like, politically, this is like the ideal moment.
Yeah, I think with some of the Supreme Court discourse that tends to happen, especially as of late, we've had, 2 or 3 Trump appointments at this point?
3
Trump appointments, right. And the Supreme Court has kind of been this thing to beat over the head of the Democratic base of, it doesn't matter if you're disillusioned with us. It doesn't matter if you're pissed at us. You need to continue voting for us so that, we can appoint the next liberal Supreme Court justice when we get the shot.
Well, and this really, like...
This is finally their chance.
Yeah, and it really became, like, this big thing in the 2016 election. Because prior to that, I mean, it was an issue, but it was never presented as, like, the issue almost, right? But, like, really with, like, Hillary, that was a big emphasis, is, like, are you really going to give Trump the Supreme Court? Blah, blah, blah. And, turns out he did get, a whole third of the court is his appointees. Obviously, like, and again, it's sort of like I've seen some people sort of be disappointed that, like, oh, it's Breyer and not, like, Thomas, and, like, yeah, like, no one wants Thomas on the court. Let's be frank, but, like, that's not going to happen under a Democratic president unless, like, something happens to Clarence Thomas. So, like, this is the best you're going to get. He's, Breyer was 81. Up there, which you would think would give Biden some pause in considering running for re-election, but
you would think.
And that's we're going to bring up a point that's been discussed on past episodes, and it's one that can piss off certain listeners, but I think it's a point worth bringing up here. Is RBG's refusal to resign in Obama's term. And there was the expectation that Hillary Clinton would probably win, so she could have her, successor appointed and hopefully pass through under a Clinton administration.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, RBG's health was suspect even then. And,
yes.
It's the kind of thing where a lot of I would say, more left-wing criticisms of RBG were she had a shot to resign and she didn't take it for, self-serving, not even like for their career, but almost in a preserving their image or enjoying the fame they got out of it kind of way. And for Breyer to, correctly make a call that, you could say you could probably get a replacement in was good thinking on his part.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's like one of the key models for the is when considering the judiciary branch is that they usually consider who's going to replace them as far as when they resign, right? And it's usually someone that's ideologically aligned with them, as is the president. And like Breyer definitely didn't have like the same medical issues that RBG had. He wasn't as much of a ticking time bomb. But again, it's like you want to replace him with someone young, and there's a few that are a few younger candidates that are on Biden's slate. I can't really tell you a ton about like the potential ones, other than the fact that it seems like he's likely to keep up with his promise to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court. But there's definitely, a lot of them tend to be on the younger side, which is good because that's what Republicans are doing, right? You have, I think, if not Kavanaugh might have been a little old, like a little over 50.
Gorsuch was the oldest of the three, right? Yeah.
Was he? I know he is now, but I know like Amy Coney Barrett's like 49
youngest,
or
yeah.
something. Like, they're like just sneaking them in. And of course, there's like a lot of, criticism about this, particularly on the right, that like, oh, this is just representative politics run awry. Even though Reagan appointed a woman based on a campaign promise he made, but no.
And also Clarence Thomas, right? Like who appointed Clarence Thomas again? Was
But that was Bush Senior, and that was because he was replacing Thurgood Marshall, so they were kind
of again playing the representative angle.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting too because it's like I've seen a few polls where they frame it as like, oh, should like Biden consider all candidates or just like the black female candidates, and like it's one of those things where like we create this sort of moral panic in this country around sort of this representation angle and whatnot, and as someone who is admittedly a white male, obviously the argument consistently is that like I'm sort of shafted from positions I would otherwise be considered because I'm not we're trying to go with this whole quote unquote woke approach of getting these different people, but the fact of the matter is these positions have so little to do with qualification anymore. And there's such a broad basis for what makes one qualified that it really, like, you could argue that like thousands of people are qualified to serve on this 9-person body, if not more. So it really doesn't, like, it's not like that's giving you a subpar candidate just to cater to a particular minority group.
That's a really good point. That's one of the things that kind of annoyed me almost about the whole Breyer stepping down, Biden promising to, throw up a black woman on the court. The biggest thing that annoyed me was just the ammunition it kind of gave people to kind of look and go, see, haha, racist. He's only looking at the black, woman candidates. When, like I'm all for representation. I'm all for, having people represent you that, come from the area that they're representing, that look like the people they're representing. I'm all for that kind of representation. I think it's annoying that Biden didn't just do it, as opposed to kind of waving his hand and going, we're gonna do this cool representative thing. I think it would have been a lot better if he had just done it when it's time to do it, as opposed to making that promise and giving all this ammunition out.
Well, it's a common like campaign tactic, right? It's like sort of this thing to kind of get you excited, like, oh, this will be like a historic first, right? That we've never had like a black woman type thing. But yeah, I kind of agree with you, right? That it sort of, it preempts that attack against whoever he nominates, and like whoever's nominated is going to get like all these questions about CRT and stuff that has no relevance to anything that they'll ever do on the court, but.
On that point, I do want to bring up a question, which is there is this view among, those who are more civic religion minded. Civic religion is the new term I'm going to use to replace 5th grade civics on the podcast.
All right.
I like that.
I mean, the Wikipedia article says as much. So, there we go. But there's this view that like, oh, the court is nonpartisan. It does not have any ideological or partisan bias, and all the Supreme Court justices are supposed to be neutral. But
They're calling balls and strikes, as the Chief Justice has put it.
right, it's the kind of thing where it's like, how could anyone, in good conscience and just observing how politicized the court has become, but also with certain things like the Heritage Foundation, with certain things like Mitch McConnell's strategy to kind of, pack every court in the country with a Heritage Foundation judge and gum up the legislative. With that approach by the American right, how could and why do people still insist on this neutrality of the Supreme Court when, frankly, that doesn't exist? And even with the, question of Biden's chance to appoint a new Supreme Court justice, why do people even engage with that tired line?
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, at least in my experience, it seems like that is kind of fading out to the wayside a bit. I'm
Mhm.
not really seeing a ton of people being like, "Oh, the Supreme Court is truly this neutral body." I really don't see it a lot anymore. Not saying that there aren't people who do it, but like I think it's sort of just again like we are a stubborn people, and if you were taught, this in every civics class that you took, that like the Supreme Court is sort of this neutral body, then you tend to like want to like you don't want to like discount it in face of new knowledge necessarily, and obviously that's problematic, but and again I think there's definitely a sense that that is fading away. I think it has kind of gone away into this sort of partisan, like it's clearly just it's sort of that legislators in robes type deal. And I mean that they can be a little bit more strategic in the sense that like I think that they do somewhat think about the law, right? But they're only really thinking about it as it pertains to like how will I be able to like shape this in the future, or if I make this decision now, will it impact my broader legal perspective down the road?
Mhm.
But it's yes, I think it's fading away, and you even like I mean even to an extent, like Breyer, right, kept insisting that like, oh, we're neutral and whatnot. But like when he retires, he's like, kind of the veil's gone, right? He's pretty clear that like, yeah, like if I don't retire now, you're gonna get another whack job on the court.
Mhm.
I think at this point, I'm more inclined to agree with Joshua in the sense where, like, I do think the idea of the courts kind of being neutral is kind of a dead concept. Although, I mean, I do understand why I guess some people who would try to believe that, but in my opinion, I feel like the courts, the Supreme Court has just always been kind of like a political tool that people have been, using the game of tug of rope to try to pull people on their side and such. So I don't know. Like, I haven't seen a lot of people with that mentality of like the Supreme Court is like this neutral power where they do everything nonpartisan and it's all fair and even. But I've definitely seen it more in the sense of like it's our Supreme Court or their Supreme Court or our judges, their judges.
Yeah, yeah, and it's, as far as I'm concerned, to see any member of the Supreme Court as, neutral when you clearly know their allegiances and who they've clerked for and who they've worked for in the past, you can't kid yourself too much.
Exactly. It would be cool to have an all quote unquote neutral court, but I don't think it's ever going to happen.
How can anyone be neutral? You know what I mean? Like,
Exactly.
That's
to
kind of the
get
point.
to the
Yeah.
point of Supreme Court justice, you have a stake in maintaining this institution. You have a stake in participating in this institution, even if you somehow have no ideological bias. You're coming in with some baggage, man.
That's
Right.
true. Yeah, I believe that.
When to
Yeah,
your
go ahead.
point about like like we know who they clerked for and whatnot. I mean, a lot of the potential candidates for Breyer's seat clerked for Breyer. And we had like I know Kavanaugh and Gorsuch for sure were clerks under Kennedy, um, and I can't remember what Barrett's history was prior to that, but like again, it's like there's this long history. Of course, most of them went to the quote unquote right schools, the Ivy Leagues, etc. And it's like it's very much this very clear pathway that like kind of has other like maybe less ideological biases that it sort of creates too. But that's probably like a whole nother discussion.
Absolutely. And also for the uninitiated, maybe could we get a glimpse of what it is about Breyer that is going to be remembered by, all these weepy-eyed New York Times columnists when he does retire or kick the bucket? And, who is on the short list? Who is going to replace him? Because my personal theory is that definitely Biden was not expecting this. I think after, last year's episode we did about, the Biden administration kind of wanting to stay in the shadows and not take credit for much. This seems to be a curveball that's finally being tossed in their court. And
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent, like he does acknowledge that he needs to do something, and like this is something that we're like, it's so banal in a lot of ways because the liberal establishment is generally okay with controlling the courts because they're not promoting anyone who's going to be anti-capitalist or anti anything that they're really concerned about that they won't necessarily express to their voters. As far as like how he'll be remembered, I mean, in some ways, I feel bad for Breyer in the sense I feel like he's kind of always been on the bench in like Ginsburg's shadow. But I think that his decision to retire compared to hers is going to improve his legacy. I think in a lot of people's eyes, I think a lot of people are going to remember that like he was the one who was more prudent in considering not just his time on the bench, but what happens next. So I think that's going to be a big part.
And who's on the short list? Like who is Biden eyeing, or who is
Well,
the
if the Republicans are to believe Kamala Harris,
they were really trying to prevent her from running for president.
I don't see that. I don't see that happening. That is, I think that's like just one of the most bizarre conspiracies I've ever seen when it comes to like the Democratic Party. I mean, like Pizzagate had more legs on than this, in my opinion. But yeah, like I mean, some of the like the main like kind of like front runners, if you will, that I've seen. I mean, I'm probably gonna butcher their names. There's Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's Biden's already appointed her to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. So that's kind of she's already kind of gone through like the vetting process. You're not going to get oh surprise, she raped 1 billion people in college, like Brett Kavanaugh. But so you have her. She's I think 51. There's a California Supreme Court justice. I think her name is Leandra Krueger. She's 45. So that would be someone you definitely have like locked in on the bench for a long time. Obviously, she hasn't quite been through. I think she was she clerked. Let's see, for John Paul Stevens and was actually in the Obama administration in a lower role. And then there's a few other people. There's South Carolina District Court Judge Michelle Childs, who's kind of sort of backed by James Clyburn, the majority whip, who kind of played a big role in Biden getting into the White House in the first place. So that might be something that's kind of weighed a little bit more into his decisions. And those are the main ones. I mean, there's a few others kind of throughout, but I think those are like the main people that you're going to see. I don't think we've really seen a ton of surprises for Supreme Court justice nominees in a while, so I doubt he'll go too far from that list.
Yeah. What are the odds that they don't deliver on the promise and decide not to take the representation route?
I think pretty low, to be honest. I don't. It's such a basic promise to fulfill that has like no real policy consequences or anything that I just don't see why you just don't deliver that unless you are just trying to sabotage literally all efforts at improving your like reelection chances, right? Like obviously, yeah, some people would be upset by like whoever he appoints, but again, it's like if you, it's worse to come across as someone who just doesn't give a shit about your promises than it is for like anything else, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, Stephen Breyer, we're gonna miss you. Loved your ice cream. All right, let's move on to the next topic in the agenda, if that's everything on Breyer.
I've got nothing else. Again, we're pretty early in this process, so we'll definitely be keeping our eyes and ears on this.
Yeah, let's see what comes of this. I would love to see if they try to set a new record for the Merrick Garland strategy. So could they ride down another 2
I guess I
years?
should say that is going to be very difficult unless like I don't think, for all their faults and like all the frustration that they've caused, I don't see the likes of like Manchin or Cinema just torpedoing this nomination process. And they're going to be essential if Republicans intend to do that. I mean, they can slow it down with the hearings and stuff like that, but it's not going to be nearly as effective as they were with Merrick Garland.
And out of curiosity, who's on the Judicial Committee right now? I want to see who's going to be really catty. If Lindsey Graham is on this, I'm actually going to tune into C-SPAN.
I think he still is. Let me check the current. We've got Dick Durbin.
Oh boy.
Chuck Grassley is the ranking member. Lindsey Graham's still there.
Oh, Chuck Grassley's there. He's going to know nothing.
Oh no,
that man is asleep.
Oh, this is a this is a perpetual rogues gallery. So on the Republican side, right, you Chuck Grassley, Lindsey Graham, Mike Lee, Ben Sass, Tom Cotton.
Ben's ass is on?
Yes.
Oh my god.
Tom Tillis, John Cornyn, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, John Kennedy, and Marsha Blackburn.
No, but at least Lindsey Graham and John Kennedy are on it, so we have the gay representation we needed for this panel. But this is a rogues gallery if I've ever seen one.
And then the Democratic side, there's a bit of a mix. You obviously got Dick Durbin as the chair, Patrick Leahy, been there forever. At least he has a little bit more wherewithal than Grassley.
Yeah.
Sheldon Whitehouse, Chris Coons, Mazie Hirono, Alex Padilla, Dianne Feinstein.
Oh no! Oh no!
Fresh up for re-election, Dianne Feinstein, Amy Klobuchar, Richard Blumenthal, Cory Booker, and Jon Ossoff.
Jon Ossoff, he did indeed jack us off. I mean, at least they freshened it up a little bit on the Democratic side. But I mean, if Dianne Feinstein is there, I'm not going to lie. I foresee a chance that she votes with the Republicans just because she forgets.
Well, I mean, she had mentioned that she doesn't really see a need to rush this, which I mean, I guess like literally there's not a whole sense to rush this, but it's like, again, she was so just like okay with the way like the Amy Coney Barrett stuff transpired that I don't know. She is not with it.
Yeah. I don't know. It feels like Jon Ossoff and Ted Cruz might be the most lucid people there. Josh Hawley is just going to be grading. Oh my gosh.
I mean, most of the Republican side. I mean, like you had, John Kennedy is the what? I don't know to call you professor or comrade. Like, come on.
You called Senator Bernie Sanders everything but an ignorant slut. That guy.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get probably some fantastic race baiting.
Oh my
all
God.
Kinds of insane stuff in this hearings.
Oh man.
So buckle up.
Oh yeah, no, the takes economy, I am projecting, invest now in Supreme Court nomination hearing. Invest now in that takes. Stonk.
Get the stonks up.
Get the stonks up on that part of the takes economy. All right. I'm going to cross my heart and pray I don't have to deal with that any sooner. Let's see. Coming up next, This has caused much more in terms of rising the number of hypertension cases as well as Havana syndrome cases in the Langley, Virginia area. Let's talk about it. The potential for World War III between Russia and Ukraine, or at least that's what the Hawks want us to think.
Right.
Yeah, they've been honestly they've been like sleeping on the job as far as I can tell. Like, I mean, compare this to when like Russia invaded Crimea.
Oh
How
my
many
God.
years ago was that? But that was during the
That
Obama
was
years.
2014. That was
Yeah,
2014.
2014. I mean, that's gosh, almost 10 years ago. Um, yeah, I mean, like comparing that to, like now to then, like you're not like getting a ton of coverage for this. It's sort of like the D-list headline on the news, like, oh yeah, there's just tanks. We're sending quote unquote lethal aids instead of weapons. A weird euphemism that I was surprised really took off with the media, but here
What
we
are
are.
lethal aids? Like, what does that even mean?
Lethal aids, that's when I don't know, because they're talking about weapons, but like
Yes.
I don't know. That is the strangest euphemism I've heard. And
Yeah,
by the way, speaking of lethal aid, you guys see this article in Jacobin, the CIA may be breeding Nazi terror in Ukraine.
I did see that article.
Yeah.
It's for all the hell that was raised about January 6th and the threat of American fascism looming around the corner. Not that I post 2016, there's been a lot of that discussion, but for us to be talking about providing this quote unquote lethal aid to what are they called? The Azov Brigade? Is that what they're calling themselves? The Azov
Something to that
regiments.
effect,
Yeah. Which is a explicitly neo-Nazi brigade. It's kind of hypocritical on my part to see, or at least in my reading of this, to see all these liberal hawks, after like really telling us that we're not being afraid enough of fascism, to then be like, by the way, we should give them money in other countries, by the way. And I wanted to get your guys' immediate reaction to this, because I feel like as soon as this started to become a headline, I saw this big push to start getting people afraid. Like the headlines were explicitly worded in a way like, World War III is about to start soon. You should be worried about this. You're not being afraid enough of this. And you even have segments of self-identifying socialists, because now that word just means whatever people want it to mean, like Vaush, saying we got to go fight in Ukraine to fight against Russia. And the amount of people I see kind of baying for blood or baying for conflict it's absurd to me. When we just had like the biggest wave of Omicron in Michigan here, several crises in the United States that we're failing to manage, whether it's that pipe burst in Pennsylvania, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's a whole host of other issues. Like why are we baying for blood right now?
So when I first saw this headline, because I remember you actually mentioned it to me. You mentioned the rise of like fascism and neo-Nazism in Ukraine right after we were talking about the whole Russian potential invasion, and the immediately thought that crossed my mind was just like shock, like whoa, that's crazy. And then it's like, is it though? Like the U.S. government funding and helping out some extreme group somewhere, starting a mess that's probably going to devolve into a bigger mess.
Yeah, look up Operation Gladio and Operation Paperclip if you want to.
Yeah, Paperclip is a perfect example. Yeah. So like I can't, like when I saw this headline, like I was like just reading the headline, I was like, I am surprised, but then not surprised at all anymore. I think it kind of I think it's an interesting situation. When I was doing some background research on this, I understand that Ukraine's trying to join NATO, and I think that one of the big kind of catalysts in this conflict was that Russia's not trying to have Ukraine join NATO and all that. But
well, it's tricky how that reporting has been done, because as I'm seeing now, it's less of Ukraine as a state making that decision, and more of Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who you may recall from his stint in the CIA, basically, saying Ukraine should join NATO. And Biden, to his credit, is telling everyone to slow their horses, but I don't know what he's officially said on the matter. And from what I understand, the Ukrainian PM has mentioned that he doesn't exactly want the conflict to escalate.
Well, I mean, why would he? I mean, it's
Exactly.
like a great way to get steamrolled, right? Like,
Exactly.
Ukraine doesn't really have the means of protecting themselves, and I think it's always tough, like, with situations like this, because it's sort of where, more peaceful ideals have to sort of, are kind of confronted by the fact that, regardless of the status of, neo-Nazism on the rise in Ukraine, you don't want, like, I mean, that's not reflective of, like, the general population there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of being artificially grown by, like, this, outsourced funding from the CIA and things like that. Um, and again, we have this long history of just funding the wrong people, etc. But it is what it is. But, like, it's one of those things where you don't want to see them, like, get have to endure an invasion. Is it worth dragging the entire world into it? Um, I would generally say no, but I don't think we're going to see it escalate that far. And maybe they end up, there might be some type sense of, like, occupied territory or something, but I don't see this necessarily escalating into a broad conflict. And I think we just don't have the type of, like, mentality in this country anymore where you're going to get in my opinion at least, a broad sense of, like, support for, like, us going over there. I don't think you're going to really see that. I could be wrong, but, like, we don't have this type of like, strong rally around the flag moment like a 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or anything like that. So I
Mm-hmm.
just don't necessarily see. And again, I think that in general, at least in my experience, I don't see people really clamoring for a conflict in the way that I have in the past for other, similar circumstances.
You're right on that, where I think, like, when it comes down to the everyday person, I don't think the everyday person clamors for war, even if they are
Hmm.
distrustful of other people's. I think this is, one of those events in the quote unquote, and I'm actually not even quote unquote, the scare quotes discourse,
Yeah,
um, that is, populated by and participated in by freaks, namely us. But, um, that on that point, like, the average person is tired. I think the average person correctly learned the lesson from 2001 onwards, that this stuff it doesn't end, ruins people's lives, and kind of just generally doesn't want to think about it. And it's really the most insane or the most elite people who participate in these kinds of discussions really clamoring for the violence.
for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially I think you hit the nail perfectly on the head when you're talking about the average American just being tired. There's so much going on right now. We're dealing with COVID. If you're into politics, midterms, like, Breyer, like, there's just so much stuff going on that, like, the Russia Ukraine conflict just can't be, your number one priority, especially like you said last time. To get the American people to really bang their war drums, you need like a 9/11, like a Pearl Harbor, like something insane to happen close to home. And this just isn't that. This is just some people fighting somewhere, Russia bad. That's kind of all you see on social media until you actually, like, completely dive in. And even me personally, I fell into that group until I actually, like, sat down, started reading, looking into the neo-Nazis, the whole Russia NATO conflict in general. So I think you hit that perfectly on the head, Adi.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that the discourse is good at generating. It's good at generating fear, and it's good at generating this kind of, or at least the way it gets people roped in, is this statement of, why don't you care about this? Why aren't you outraged about this? Why aren't you as afraid as I am? And it's the kind of thing where you can definitely have reservations about Putin and Russia. That's completely fair.
Yeah.
But to the point that any of us should, voluntarily sign up to go fight. I don't necessarily see that as being beneficial or useful right now. And I think a friend of the show, Ryan, was, talking about this issue with me Saturday night, and was kind of mentioning there was this peace march in Kiev, I want to say, or I forget where in Ukraine, but it was like the Russian Ukrainian population and some other local Ukrainians trying to do like a peace march across a bridge, saying like, guys, we don't want this. No one wants this. And it's obviously, this is an obvious point, and this is why, like, the silencing of peace movements across history like has been unfortunate, because pushing for peace is somewhat of an unpopular opinion, or you get dismissed as a hippie or whatever. But it just goes to show that, like, the people who suffer in war are everyday people. The people who want to fight are the governments. The people who want to fight are, the freaks who populate the elite ranks. It's not everyday people who clamor for conflict like this.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that, the Ukrainian people are having peace marches while America's kind of ramping up and sending lethal aid, over to Ukraine. I think that's pretty telling.
That and another.
I
Go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like everything that's been said so far. And I think, like part of me is thinking that the lethal aid is less with the intention of it actually being used, and more so just kind of like a re-escalation of sort of like Cold War, like I've got missiles on the other side of your shore and like that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't see like, I mean, not to lay on like Sarah Palin could see Russia from Alaska, from her back door in Alaska or whatever, but like you don't have like, they're not like treating that like, oh, this could be a potential like staging ground or a war zone if this gets out of hand. Like no one's taking it seriously on the domestic side.
Absolutely. And it's kind of funny how, like, in the wake of 2016 and with some of the Russian election hacking, theories or discourse that came up in predominantly liberal circles, right? It kind of did reawaken this kind of Russophobic tendency among that establishment. And this kind of, like you mentioned, this reigniting of Cold War era fears about that part of the world. And also, well, on that point, trying to coerce or trying to get Ukraine to join NATO. NATO is the biggest example of a Cold War relic that existed to contain the Soviet Union, and once the Soviet Union fell, we still kept this thing going. And if anyone was listening to Chapo this weekend, they had a joke where it was like, what if NATO's like a party and, all the cool people left? Like, what if France just walked out of NATO and then everyone left, and the only country left in it is Lithuania? But that's kind of it, is like, we're still holding on to these Cold War assumptions of foreign policy to this day. And that's not really like a plebeian interpretation on my part. This kind of Cold War style analysis was applied to Al-Qaeda and Iraq in, the Bush era. Condoleezza Rice cut her teeth on being like a expert on the Soviet Union. I think that's her pedigree. And they tried to apply, like, dealing with the Soviets style policy to that part of the world, viewing them as an existential enemy in that capacity was the strategy there. And we see how that works out. And you see it again with how this conflict is trying to be engineered now, and now literally trying to bring the remains of the Soviet Union back on the table because we don't know where to orient, this ship of empire.
In some ways, reminds me of the kind of infamous piece by Francis Fukuyama, "The End of History" and whatnot, when the Soviet Union collapsed. And like, it's like absurd, right? The end of history ends at this moment, but in ways that like I don't think he intended at all. It feels like he was right at the end of the day, right? Like it feels like it's not that history is like over per se, it's just that we refuse to move on. We are stuck in this weird like Cold War triangulation thing. There was like a brief period where, like we kind of had a Russia that we liked, but they were like horrible domestically and things like that, and a failed nation in a ton of different ways. But now that like they're like, they're not really our friends anymore, and so now it's just like, yeah, like we cannot move past this Cold War era philosophy. We have all of these relics from back then that just, why do we keep them around? Because we always have, as far as we're concerned.
I mean, yeah, that's basically what American empire was able to build itself into, as an enemy against, or as a force against.
Mm-hmm.
And we, again, like as per Fukuyama's statements, this liberal capitalistic tendency won. It crushed the labor movement internally. It crushed, real socialist challenges abroad. You could argue China's, an extension of that. I think there's a dispute to what degree that's true. And it's funny, that America gets to be the sore loser at the end of this. Like, you have everything you wanted. You got it. You got the solution you wanted. We have fucking Coke freestyle machines. We have 24-hour 7-Elevens. Dog, you can get lobster all year round at fucking Red Lobster. Like, you have what you wanted. Why is it not enough for you guys? I don't get it. You got to make that consumerist paradise, but you can't do it without continually enforcing domination at gunpoint. And to the extent that, you can reason people out of that, is the extent to which you have to reject this society of convenience and domination. But getting people to let go of that is tough.
Yeah.
I don't know. It is a bit of a depressing topic, but I think at the end of the day, sane people should continue to ask for peace, reject violence, reject this kind of baying for blood. And anyone who looks at you like you're immature for not wanting to, partake in that kind of violence. I mean, ask yourself, like, what is it that they value? What is it that they're trying to do? What do they think politics is for? What do they think political change looks like? What is their version of an ideal world? And I think that kind of person ultimately has a very pessimistic view of humanity and has a very pessimistic view of what human life is for. Sorry to get spiritual there for a second.
I'm inclined to agree. I'm definitely an anti-war type of person. I can imagine putting myself, in the shoes of someone who is actively pro-war, even though I know some people like that exist. It's not like I'm like creating some boogeyman. But no, you're right. I couldn't try to rationalize with that viewpoint.
Yeah, I hear you there. Josh, anything from your end? Like, I think I exhausted this topic on my end.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I don't really have a whole lot else to contribute on that front. It's just sort of this we just keep repeating the past.
Exactly. And I think, if America cannot reform, I call upon the peoples of Russia and Ukraine. Guys, join forces against us and have us produce your tracksuits.
Oh my God.
That's awesome.
I think that's a vision for a better world we can all agree on.
I think so too, man.
All right. So, final topic in the outline. We've actually made like a ton of great time, actually. The r/antiwork interview that was on Fox News.
Yes.
So just quick question. Have we all watched the interview?
I have.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have.
Okay, good. So for the listeners who have not yet seen it, actually let's give a little bit of background.
Yeah.
Because r/antiwork, I'm not sure when you guys started following this subreddit. It was recommended to me by a friend in, I want to say, 2019. And this is initially when it was less of anything politically minded, and it was more of just almost like Tony Robbins-esque kind of guys who were like sick of working to some extent. There were also like a couple people who just like really hated American work culture. There were people who were more like minimalists and kind of opposed to this kind of materialist view of success. It was a lot more than like what it is understood to be. And it was more of just people generally like questioning the ways in which we view work, the ways in which our society looks at success, values certain definitions of success. It was a big grab bag, and I think the subreddit blew up in the wake of the Great Resignation that was last winter, I want to say, right?
I think so.
It was like the summer through winter.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think it started a little bit before winter, but yeah.
Well, and on that note, by the way, in an interview, Mao Zedong once said regarding the French Revolution, I don't think the French Revolution has ended. I will take that a step further and say, I don't think the Great Resignation has ended yet either. I think it still continues. But to that end, that subreddit I think it just blew up in the wake of that. And it kind of exploded in its membership. It exploded in the amount of people who were explicitly fed up with working conditions. And I think with the, renewed interest in left-leaning politics and left-leaning views on labor in the wake of Bernie in 2016, you now have a contingent of people who are able to articulate in that style and in that language a, critique of labor practices, life under very strict work environments much more effectively. But I would not go as far as to say it was a movement, but many people consider it a movement.
I actually do consider it a movement, especially as of like more recently. I think the way you summed up the subreddit was great. Like, antiwork was like a place where I feel like kind of one of two people would kind of sit down and talk. One person in this group would be like, your typical liberal who's not explicitly against capitalism, but is just tired of, being treated like garbage at work. They would sit down and talk about a way to negotiate raises. They would talk about kind of like they would complain about, not having breaks, things of that nature. And then the other type of person is your typical socialists, the people who realize that a lot of the things that we produce in a capitalistic environment is done for surplus and not actually out of need, and that a lot of the work we do is ultimately pointless. And I think that an interesting thing to mention is that there was a lot of infighting in this subreddit between those two people. I actually was on here today after when it got done being private, and I saw at least 3 or 4 posts for like liberals complaining about the anarchist types being too radical, and the socialists saying that liberals are should just leave, things of that nature. So, I mean, I would call it a movement in general, but I think that at the end of the day, this movement did fall apart just due to optics alone.
I think what was useful about this space is that people were able to share like the emotional and like spiritual pains they kind of felt, and were able to share their stories. And that process of sharing stories and that process of comparing notes is indicative of building class consciousness and building solidarity to some capacity. But I've talked at length on this show about how social media operates and how people can conflate political posting for activism and conflate it for building a movement. But in terms of like broadly affirming this kind of exploitative framework's effect on people, I think you're right. Like, it had that net positive of normalizing that sentiment, or at least until that Fox News interview.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. I also think another thing that was kind of bad, like I said, the entire movement just kind of fell apart because of optics. And I feel like,
or at least the subreddit started to,
I'll say subreddit, right? That's fair. And I feel like there wasn't one specific thing that kind of made anti-work r/anti-work kind of implode on itself. Like the Fox News interview was obviously a big catalyst, but I feel like I don't want to say this because I really do love the subreddit, but it really was a long time coming where like even the name, if you talk about just, you know, oh yeah, I'm a part of this group that call themselves anti-work, like people are gonna look at you like, what do you mean? And then depending on which group that you're subgroup that you're kind of a part of, you'd have to go, but actually it's not actually anti-work, it's more anti, you know, garbage, you know, bosses or bad, you know, work
You
environment.
had to preface it with that, yeah.
Well,
I think-
and to kind of add to that real quick, I mean, like it's, you know, the optics and like, you know, we've kind of demonstrated with virtually every single movement in the past, you know, half decade or so that like, you know, being, you know, like something like Black Lives Matter, no one has any real appreciation for subtlety or anything beyond the literal like definition of something like that, right? It was always like, oh, well, what about people who aren't black? Do their lives not matter? And like that was always the general challenge to it that like has been incredibly difficult for that movement to overcome, let alone, you know, anti-work, which I think cuts at a much deeper cornerstone of the American culture.
Hmm.
That is a really good point. Yeah, that's actually, yeah, that makes sense. Like Black Lives Matter, that was a very common argument. I guess it's one that could easily be followed up with, yeah, their lives matter too. But you know, yeah, there was also a but actually there.
Yeah.
But I think that anti-work, just like Black Lives Matter, I feel like you could rationalize better because, you know, you're not saying anyone's lives doesn't matter, but anti-work make it seem like you're explicitly against work, which a lot
Right.
of the
Yeah. There's no subtlety to that at all.
right. So that was definitely one of the downfalls of anti-work. Kind of the clashing between the groups, the name, the optics, and then the amazing Fox News interview. So I wanna just kind of jump on that. I didn't realize that the Fox News interview was happening when it did.
And it was
Um,
only 3 minutes. It was only
right,
a 3-minute
yeah.
interview.
It was very short, and I think one of the problems was that in anti-work or in the sidebar or wherever it was, they had a whole section saying that like it was like an agreement for the moderators not to make media appearances. So that was really interesting to see them kind of go back on that and to hop on Fox News anyways. But the interview, like so we've all seen the interview.
We've all seen
Yes.
the interview at this
It
point, yeah.
was amazing. It looked like I don't know who chose. Does anybody actually know that? Like why that moderator specifically was chosen to be in that interview to represent anti-work?
That was my question at the start of this, and
Yeah, same.
my own theory is that it has to be somewhere between the moderator wanted the attention and Fox News found a moderator and reached out to them. I think it's somewhere in between that.
Hmm.
But I think, you know, I did want to raise this point first, is that Fox News has a history of getting people with, you know, very poor ideological coherence, no media training, and you know, a general like they're not used to dealing with culture war orientated newscasters who want to make them look bad. And there's one example of this that I talked to you guys about, which was it was an interview with the Million Student March organizer, and this was in 2016, so I remember this, where, you know, this was a very well-meaning person. I'm sure she did not mean to look like a useful idiot for Fox News. I want to believe that it was in, you know, she went there with good intentions. But when it came down to explaining to Fox News host Neil Cavuto why the Million Student March exists, what their play is for, you know, free college, and why, you know, and I think their goal was, you know, to tax the rich to do it. And Fox News kept trying to hammer this point of, so you want the government to pay for it, which is their favorite talking point, and something that, you know, someone should have done a better job of either refusing to answer or unpacking the point. And I don't think she was able to do it.
I think that's a great point. Like Fox News absolutely
But
does
they tried again with the Million Student March again, and the second time they sent someone much better equipped to answer it, and there's like it's night and day between those two interviews.
really. I
Yeah,
think an important distinction needs to be made here, though, right? Because at the end of the day, for the Million Student March, it was pretty much the Fox reporter attacking, which and they kind of fell into that pressure. I think in this case for anti-work, it was almost worse because anybody who, like you said, was ideologically coherent, anybody who knew what they were talking about, they could answer those questions. Like as I was watching I was watching this interview. I'm watching this guy ask the moderator questions. And I'm like, these are layups. Like these questions are not hard to answer. There was not a lot of gotcha questions.
and the common joke was that like this is the most stereotypical Reddit moderator to have ever gotten on the stage. And I personally, like, people were making fun of them. I personally just feel really bad for them. I feel secondhand, like, just embarrassment for them. Like, that they kind of went there with very little preparation. They didn't know what was going to come and happen. And they were kind of just, like, repeating these statements that you hear on the subreddit very often. And I'm sure they agree with them for the right reasons, but just don't have the wherewithal to articulate those in an argument with an ideologically committed, opponents. Which is why I'm anti-debate, because debate is a performance. Debate is about, especially in the American context, it's not about rationality. It's not about good faith. It is about making someone look bad. And they were able to do that. They were able to do that really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so unfortunate because like everything in that interview just went wrong. He didn't like dress up. The lighting and the camera was bad. Camera quality, it was all just a mess.
Respectfully too, like I think a lot of people have been using how bad that interview to be like, to make assumptions about the interviewee. And I think that like they use female pronouns, but they never specified.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's confusing, and I think like they thought they were ready to do it, and then understandably, I think like they just lost their nerve, and we're not ready to do this.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, that's definitely how it came across.
And
yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and like there was a point there where to be on the subreddit, you kind of have to be a fellow traveler. You know what I mean? And like, I kind of share a lot of those ideas of finding modern work culture abrasive and oppressive, of finding, this society that like values ambition and careerism over like well-being. Those are points that get brought up a lot. Or even like being happy with, a simple life, and like, simple labor is not something to be ashamed of. And I think that person who went up embodied all of those qualities, but just did not have the wherewithal to unpack this because, again, a Fox News host is a hostile creature. You cannot.
Yeah.
They are not talking with you in good faith. They do not want to unpack your framework for you. They want to make you look bad. They did it. Jesse Waters fucking did it.
And I think that's one of the most annoying things. I think that, while watching that interview, it's like the Fox News host wasn't making too many great points. He was just kind of watching the
it was very boilerplate, conservative prosperity gospel, work hard to be a good person type shit.
Exactly. Like when the Reddit mod was saying that like he was a dog walker, and the Fox News host audibly laughed. Like if somebody wants to walk dogs for a living,
that made me mad. That made me mad because it's like you're just looking down on this person for not having the same kind of bourgeois acculturation to have a fancier job. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's very unfortunate, and it just kind of gave like all of anti-work the worst optics ever. And then so that all kind of bundled together with the whole infighting, the name, everything. When anti-work does blow up, and it did look like everyone knew what anti-work was, at its worst possible moment.
Which I think is precisely like the flaw in the conception of it, is that it is ultimately at the end of the day a subreddit that was a great space for people to share their experiences and kind of vent broadly and learn to shed some of these societal assumptions. But I don't think it was ever ready to become a movement, which is why, like, you know, something like BLM, which has the same like hostility that it gets met with when it comes to that, like, you know, tenuousness of its name. You know, BLM is a organizing space. It is a thing you can organize behind. Anti-work, it's such a complex topic because we're unpacking so many, like Josh was saying, like you're unpacking so many elements of America's society and culture that it doesn't have coherent asks. It doesn't have, you know, a space for you to safely discuss what you're trying to say to a hostile interviewer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I feel like that's just it's just super frustrating, right? Because first of all, it was a great space to kind of be in and to be around and to, you know, share stories with. And then, you know, all of a sudden you get this interview where you get like people looking at you. This could have been that point. This could have been that conversion from, oh, this is just an online space to, oh, we're an actual movement now. Let's like organize. Let's get things together. Let's tell people what we're about. Let's, you know, spread our message. And it just ended the way it did. You know, like it could have easily been that movement, that great space, but it just wasn't. They just dropped the ball.
Right. Right.
I think it is interesting to note that. I'm not sure if have you been on AntiTwerk recently?
I saw a lot of the angry like updates and I chose not to look at it.
Yeah, there's a lot of screeching in the subreddit, not gonna lie.
Well, right, because it's like it's such a diverse space and people are approaching it from their own like experience that it's not ready to coherent anything. And it's just, I can't believe this mod made us look bad. And I think, you know, that's the fundamental issue there is like, you know, a single media appearance does not change hearts and minds. This kind of West Wing approach we have to politics and to thinking where it's like, oh, if I just come in and speak my truth or I make this amazingly rationalized argument, they're going to see how wrong they are and they're going to, you know, acquiesce their, you know, deep-seated hatred of me. You know, it doesn't really work like that. I think, you know, Fox News is a institution that is hostile to that kind of shit. They would never have let it fly to begin with. And I don't know. I personally just feel really bad for the person who went on because now they're just a target for so much hate on that subreddit. And I know they fucked up. I agree that they fucked up, but I don't think they should have ever been put in that position in the first place.
I think they might have also been removed as a mod last I've checked. I could be wrong on that, but
something like that.
Yeah, it's insane. The entire rollout. It sucks because now if you want to like kind of now if AntiWork wants to kind of link up and organize and to like do something, in every space they go to, in every single space, they can just send this 3-minute video and just everyone will just laugh at them. You know what I mean? Like it's such that one media appearance is just so impactful. Not in the sense that like now the layman knows what anti-work is and what they mean, and now he can ideologically destroy them in the marketplace. But just the idea that like no matter what, if you try to rally under the name anti-work, it just takes one person to send a YouTube link to just make people laugh at you, to make it seem like it completely invalidated the entire movement. And so now I know I've talked to you about this, Adi, but now the subreddit has split off now that the interview happened. So there's a new subreddit called r/WorkReform as well as r/anti-movement. I had spent some time taking a look at WorkReform. And I think it does kind of fix some of the issues anti-work has. It's not my cup of tea though. The first one is the name. Obviously, WorkReform is a lot easier to justify than just anti-work. Another very important distinction that from what I saw, WorkReform, the groups of people that are in WorkReform were more of the liberal, let's talk about how, you know, garbage my job is. Let's talk about how my boss mistreats me. Those guys kind of moved over to WorkReform as opposed to the socialist anarchist types that kind of stayed and hung around in anti-work, which I thought was a very interesting split.
Yeah, I think what this stuff goes to show is like, you know, there's a deeper critique to some of this stuff that like it interconnects all these disparate issues. And I know I was tweeting about this earlier, and I think I John, I told you about this book. I just finished reading One Straw Revolution by Masanobu Fukuoka. It's a book mainly about, his organic farming method, but he talks a lot about, life, traditional agriculture, and, how to view, man and nature not as separate, but, as part of an integrated whole. But he has a passage in the book, and I sent it to both of you guys. You guys mind if I read it real quick before we jump it? Yeah. So I think this is very prescient on the subject of how do you take into account all the myriad things that were being said on that subreddit? Because in a way, I feel like they're all true. And I feel like there is something to be said about, one, the necessity of work, but also how it gets viewed. So I think he gets into this very adequately in my reading. So from the book, the chapter is called Various Schools of Natural Farming. I do not particularly like the word work. Human beings are the only animals who have to work, and I think this is the most ridiculous thing in the world. Other animals make their livings by living, but people work like crazy, thinking that they have to in order to stay alive. The bigger the job, the greater the challenge, the more wonderful they think it is. It would be good to give up that way of thinking and live an easy, comfortable life with plenty of free time. I think that the way animals live in the tropics, stepping outside in the morning and evening to see if there's something to eat and taking a long nap in the afternoon, must be a wonderful life. For human beings, a life of such simplicity would be possible if one worked to produce directly his daily necessities. In such a life, work is not work as people generally think of it, but simply doing what needs to be done. To move things in this direction is my goal. It is also the goal of the 7 or 8 young people who live communally in the huts on the mountain and help out with the farming chores. These are people who come to help him out on his farm.
Mm-hmm.
These young people want to become farmers, to establish new villages and communities, and to give this sort of life a try. They come to my farm to learn the practical skills of farming that they will need to carry out this plan. So in this, segment, he kind of outlines that, it's not necessarily work. The fact that you have to labor is it's a fact of life, but it's the attitude to it that paints this discussion. And that's what's getting missed in all of this, whether it's, a cringeworthy interview, whether it's Fox News, whether it's the libs getting owned again. The fact of the matter is we have these warped and distorted, values that we project onto things like hard work, things like productivity. And John, like you were mentioning earlier, production is something that we orient towards building surpluses for profit as opposed to meeting needs. I digress on, what does the future, really look like? I'm not exactly the best expert to answer that question, but, in Fukuoka's estimation, he's saying, I'll take the path of just doing what needs to be done as opposed to what is expected of me to be productive.
So speaking of the future, when it comes to online spaces and things like anti-work, things like, because the idea of the difference between work and labor is an important distinction. So when it comes to movements like anti-work, specifically when it comes to online spaces, do you think that meeting on Reddit, going online, discussing these difference in ideals, discussing these virtues, do you think that's a good way to organize a movement, organize some way to get their message out?
I mean, I don't know, because this is an extended conversation we've had on the show multiple times, not only with you guys, personally, but even with other guests on, what is the role of social media in left-wing politics? What is the role of, social media even in personal life? You know
Right.
what I mean? And holistically, as far as I see it, social media should only be seen as a tool. It should not be seen as anything more than that. I don't think that you can have a revolution within this space any more than you have one in a real world. To think that one is, that this one is where it's going to happen I think that's a little too much of wishful thinking. You have to be out in the world doing some of this. But what gets me is that socialism, or sorry, not socialism, social media. God damn it. When I was lucky enough to actually talk to Matt Christman, we kind of came to this idea that social media is the literal marketplace of ideas. You ascribe worth to them with likes. It is not a space where you can resolve contradictions. It's not a space where you can resolve things dialectically. It's much more like the market than it is, some, Socratic circle where great thinkers come and, new ideas are forged in, the fires of debate. It doesn't work like that on social media. I think it's great for outreach. I think it's great for getting people interested. I think it's great for advertising. I think it's great for, some things. But in terms of this being, the tool that will, build people's abilities to, participate in a struggle, I'm not convinced on those grounds.
No, I think that
I was also gonna to kind of add to that real quick. I also think that not only does it have those problems, I think it's really it's the start of it, right? You can't like I don't think it's something that you can really maintain as like the primary means through which a movement exists, at least in my opinion.
So you think that the value of the movement has to come from some real world, offline, like people doing things?
Yes,
Yeah,
because the
yeah.
movement is people. I'm not saying that to be like faux inspirational. I'm saying that because that's the literal truth. People are the movement, not the tools they use.
That's true. I asked that because there was the whole AMC GameStop thing that happened on Wall Street Bets on Reddit also. And I was just kind of last night I was just kind of thinking to myself and kind of comparing and contrasting what happened with antiwork versus what happened with Wall Street Bets. Now I think I am being a bit facetious calling Wall Street Bets a movement because it really just wasn't. It probably had some very interesting undertones, but I'd argue that the message definitely isn't really like a big like societal restructuring or anything insane like that. But I was just kind of comparing and contrasting. I think that at the end of the day, you guys are probably right. I think that obviously you need bodies off of away from computers to do stuff in order for a movement. But Adi, I think you do tend to undersell the importance of social media when it comes to these types of movements.
It has a role. Like I'm not downplaying the role it has in educating people, because I'll admit it, I got introduced to some of these ideas online. So I won't downplay that. Like it's a great place to get started with some of this. And like you're saying, like with the AMC stock thing, I would say that's more of just investors using social media as a tool to organize their class interests. But you're right. Like the technology as a tool, yes, it does help this, but it ultimately needs to serve the people who lead it, as opposed to being an aspect of the end state. Do you know what I mean?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Social media alone is not going to do anything.
Right. It's people who will do this. People organizing, people conversing with one another, people in solidarity with one another. That's what I'm getting at. Is the human hearts is what will drive this, not having the right takes online.
That's fair. What do you think the future is for r/WorkReform?
Good luck, guys. Maybe you'll start a podcast and plug in on WorkReform. If that's you, good luck. I don't know. Any other closing thoughts on this anti-work subreddit discussion?
I hope that 3-minute video is forgotten, because I do love anti-work. I really do.
Yeah, I think that I think that it can be forgotten, right? I mean, and maybe to their benefit, there was that also really embarrassing interview on a local, I think it was a local channel with the birds aren't real. movement.
Yeah, the guy threw up on.
I
Yeah,
love
that became a lot more viral, I think. So I think, just hope that you can hide in the shadow of that other embarrassing video and hopefully rebuild from where they are now.
And what I'll say too, for everyone who's feeling discouraged, like don't let a single media appearance be the thing that discourages you from this. This is a fight that has existed before any of us were born, and like you said, John, like it wasn't all for bad. Like a lot of people were able to tie their sense of emotional pain to the conditions of their work, really adding new definition to that meaning of alienated labor, right? It's not just that, we're alienated from the surplus value we create in a Marxist sense. We're also, alienated from our humanity in a sense.
Yeah, like the book you read describes, he felt, the best when he's only doing exactly what he needs to do, laboring just for the day, not necessarily working, but laboring. So yeah, I agree with that entirely.
Yeah. Anyways, sorry to get really mystic there, but that's the vibe I've been catching lately.
No worries, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Why not?
It's good.
I think we're great on time. We got 9 minutes left, but any closing thoughts from you guys?
I don't have anything. We're in for a bit of a ride, following all these news stories as they develop and whatnot. But
Mhm.
I think that's at the end of the day, I don't think anything earth shattering is happening. I don't think maybe a movement has sort of taken a step back, but I don't think it'll be the end of it. And I don't think replacing a liberal with another liberal on the Supreme Court, or someone who leans liberal at least, isn't going to change anything. I mean, we still have a
Was it 6-3?
yeah, 6-3 split. Yeah, it's I think it's not again, nothing earth shattering has really happened.
Mm-hmm. And I think it helps to view history as like a live wire. None of these events are necessarily the things that are going to end history, like like Fukuyama said. History still moves on. You still have to wake up the next day, and it's in that sense you start to adapt to your reality. All right, I will calm down. John, any points from your end?
Final points. I'm very interested to see if anti-work is going to fizzle out or if they're going to bounce back. I hope they do bounce back. I'm very interested to see whatever's going to happen in terms of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And I am very interested to see a Black woman in the Supreme Court potentially. So I think all in all, it's been pretty exciting. Not, game changing, like Josh said, not anything, wild, but I think it's, definitely piqued an interest.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a blast. Thanks again, both of you, for coming to the Greenhouse. And thanks again to you, dear listener, for coming back again. Just some quick housekeeping. We are no longer on Facebook and Instagram. None of y'all were there anyways. I don't want to be there. Trying to think what else. No, I think that about does it for housekeeping. Yeah, follow Josh on Twitter. I'll plug his handle below. And you can follow the show at Pod Greenhouse. Links to all our other stuff below. And until then, see you next time in the Greenhouse. Take care.